Okay, movement 3, question 15. So the bars for this one are 27 to 52, which is pages in the score, page 54, page 55, page 56, page 57, up to the end of the minuet before the trio starts, which is bar 53. Okay, question A. Which section starts at bar 35? So find bar 35 on your score. And if you want to give this a go by yourself, then pause the video now. If not, I'll talk you through it. Okay, so I'll talk you through it. So you should have found bar 35 here. And ideally, when you get to the point where you're actually doing your exam in the summer of year 13, you should know where all the sections are, what all the structures are and where the sections are in terms of bar numbers on the score for each of the movements in the Haydn. It's something that isn't that difficult to memorize and to learn either by sight or by bar number, and just learn the numbers. And it's just going to make your life an awful lot easier navigating around depending on what questions you get. Hopefully you should know as well, even if you can't recall the exact bar number, say your mind's gone blank in the exam, but you should definitely know that the minuet is in rounded binary form. So we have an A section, we have a B section, and then we have a return of the A section, which is slightly altered, so it's called A1. And we know at this stage that we are, more than halfway through, or certainly we're not at the beginning of the minuet. So we're not anticipating this section to be the first A section. It's possible it's the start of the B section, although, maybe that's slightly unlikely based on how far through we are. So it's likely to be the return of the A section, but we need to have evidence of that. If you don't know the bar numbers and you're relying on looking in the score, you need to be able to see something in the music that is a landmark that tells you that that original theme has returned, the one that goes da, 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 the one that's starting on the A's. So if I start looking at the score from bar 35, and I'm going to focus on the flute line and the violin line, because generally speaking, they are the ones that are going to carry the main part of the tune, or the most recognizable part of the tune in terms of melody, in a key section, in a key sort of structural section where a theme is being reintroduced. Obviously, other instruments can take their turn in having parts of the melody, but these are the instruments that I would suggest focusing on. So if the flute's doubling the violin one part, which is very common. So if I'm just going to look at the flute at the top, that first bar has got 6 quavers. I don't really recognise that looking at the score. Nothing really jumps out at me. So I'm going to look at the next bar, which is bar 36, and I do recognise this because I can see it's going A, G sharp, A. And I recognise that. I know that's my lower chromatic auxiliary note. So I also know that's not the start of the theme, and I'm being asked to look from bar 35. So I'm going to go back to bar 35 and look a little bit more closely at these quavers. And what I will see is that we've actually got the A, B. But in between, we've got leaping intervals as auxiliary notes moving away from those key notes of the melody. So we've actually got the A, B, A, G sharp, A, and it keeps going. So there's the next A, there's the next B, there's the next A. So I can now see that this melody, and then from this bit, da da dun 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 bum. Obviously, I'm not turning over the page yet because I don't need to. I know that we're back with our A theme, so I know that this section is the start of it's the return of A, but it's A1 because it has been altered, and I've got evidence of how it's been altered with the extra auxiliary notes, or the extra embellishment from bar 35. Okay, so the next question, B, is state in full the key at bar 43. So if I know my stuff, I should have worked out that at bar 35, we've returned to the tonic because it's the return of the A section, and it would be fairly unusual to return to that in a rounded binary setting and not be in the same key. And I know that that key is D major, but it's not asking me for the key at 35, it's asking me for the key at 43, so I've got to investigate a little further. So if you want to give that a go by yourself, pause the video now. If not, we will look at bar 43 and I will talk you through the steps together. Okay, so this is bar 43 and I'm going to look at my score because it's a bit difficult for me to see that. Right, so the first thing we've got to do is look at the key signature. So my key signature is still as it is throughout the entire minuet, and that is 2 sharps, suggesting D major. And as I've just said, we know that we were in D major at the start of the minuet. The next thing we have to do is rule out the fact that we might have a modulated. So we have to look for added accidentals. It's possible we're in the relative minor, which would have the same key signature as D major, which would be B minor. But in order for us to know it would be in B minor, the added accidental would be the raised 7th, the sharpened 7th. So B, C, D, E, F, G, A, we would be seeing A sharps. Similarly, if it has modulated within the music to a related key, there will be added accidentals on the score. So my first port of call is to examine bar 43 and see if there are any added accidentals. And immediately, what do we have here but C naturals? So the key signature has obviously not changed. There's not been a double bar with a change of key signature, but the fact that we can see C naturals quite significantly through this bar would suggest that we're not in D major. It's not going to be as straightforward as that. We're going to have to look at some other things to confirm where we are, but that's pointing us in a new direction. So what you should be thinking now is if my C's are being naturalised, it means that at this moment in time, at bar 43, I only have 1 sharp, and that's an F sharp. And so you should now be thinking about your circle of fifths and think about the keys that only have an F sharp in the key signature, which is G major, or its relative minor, E minor. But for there to be an E minor key here, we would need the sharpened 7th. And the sharpened 7th is a D sharp. I'm going to look elsewhere on the score. Well, there's a D in the following bar in the flute. That's not a D sharp. I don't see any other sharps or anything else going on other than those C naturals. So that would lead me to think, okay, it's most likely that we are in G major, because G major is the key that has just F sharps, and there are no other sharps at play here. Now, in order to confirm it's G major, you need to do 2 things. The first is that you need to consider whether that is a realistic modulation from D major. So we know that the symphony is in D major. We know that the minuet has started in D major. We suspect there's been a modulation. Is it likely that a D major piece has modulated to G major? And hopefully the answer that you're coming up with is yes, it is likely, because it's the subdominant key. So it's modulated to the subdominant. It's moved 1 step on the circle of fifths. It's gone anti-clockwise from a 2 sharp key to a 1 sharp key, from D to G. Okay, the other popular choice in terms of staying in the major would be that it had modulated 1 step clockwise on the circle of fifths and it had gone to the dominant, which is A. But we'd be seeing G sharps, we'd be seeing added accidentals because we'd be moving round the circle of fifths and adding sharps. We've taken away a sharp, we've taken away our C sharps, so G major. So that's the first thing. Yes, it's plausible, it's a realistic choice of modulation. But the second thing, in order to completely confirm, is that we need to look for the chords and consider whether we have, to really clarify this, a perfect cadence. So when we're examining chords and cadences, I'm always going to look at the root notes, the bottom notes of the chord. Obviously it might be in an inversion, so it's not the root note, but I'm going to look at the bass part. So that note that I've got there is an F sharp. Okay, so I've got F sharps, I've got C naturals in lots of places. What else have I got? I've got D, in the oboe 2. Love the oboe 2 part, it's always very telling. I've got a D and an A in the bassoon part. So I think I must have a 7th chord here because I'm sure I've identified more than 3 different notes. So after a while, when you go through it, and you can look at the brass instruments that are in D, what they've got written as what they look like Cs, but actually because these instruments are tuned to D, we actually know that what looks like a C on the score is a D. So they are playing Ds, but you might not want to bother with that because obviously it's confusing. The notes that you should have worked out you have in that chord in bar 43 are Ds, F sharps, As, and C naturals. So that is a D chord with the 7th on top. Now, if we're in G major, that chord is a 5-7. It's chord 5 with a 7th on it. So let's look at the next bar and let's see what we've got in the bass line, because if we've got a perfect cadence here in G, it's really going to confirm our thoughts. And yes, that bass note in the cello part is a G. And we've got a G chord. If you go through, we've got Bs in the violins, we've still got our Ds that are being held by the brass instruments. We've got Bs here, etc., etc. The bassoon is playing a G and a B, nice third there. So we have actually got, from bar 43 into 44, we've got a perfect cadence in G major. What's slightly less sort of concrete is the fact that the chord 5 in bar 43 itself has the F sharp in the bass. So it's actually chord 5 in first inversion, and it's the 7th chord as well. So some of those notes might have thrown you, but actually we need that 7th because it's that raised, so it's that 7th note moving to the D that is helping us realise that we're in G major, because it's a C and it is naturalised. So the 7th in that chord 5 is showing us that we're in G major. And I'm quite happy with that as a modulation. It's gone to the subdominant G major. Okay, so now we've got the questions where we have to look for different harmonic features, and we have to look through all the bars, so we've got quite a lot of material to look through. Oh, I thought I'd lost my sheet then. Okay, I found it again. Right, so the first one, a Neapolitan chord. Now, if you think you can remember what you have to look out for a Neapolitan chord, that's great. Pause the video, go and have a look. If you can't remember, stay with me. So the Neapolitan chord is the one that's built on the flattened 2nd degree of the scale. So you need to know what key you're in, and then you need to go up from, note 1, the tonic, and it's the 2nd degree of the scale, note 2. So in C major, it would be a D, and that would be flattened. So if you were in C major, you would have D flats. If you're in D major, you would have E flats. If you're in G major, you would have A flats. The likelihood is that the way we're going to be able to identify this Neapolitan chord is by seeing flattened notes. Now, it doesn't tell us whether it's in an inversion. It's also not a Neapolitan 6, which would definitely be the inversion. We just don't know. It just says a Neapolitan chord. So we are basically looking for a flattened note. But we obviously, because we're looking from bars 27 to 52, we've just identified that there is a modulation within this passage. We don't know where we're going to find that Neapolitan chord. So we don't know whether we're looking for an E flat or an A flat, or possibly there's a section where it's in another key as well. So let's have a look. If you want to now go and have a look for that note yourself, you can pause it, or if you're still not sure, we can do it together. Okay, so remember that this question is asking us to look from bar 27. The first time I looked at this, I started looking from bar 35 again. So you need to just always double check that you're looking at the correct bars. So 27 is from here, and I am scanning for a flattened note. Now, it's likely that that will be a flat, so the slightly slanted B sign. However, it's possible, for example, if we're in B minor, which is the relative minor and quite a plausible key we could be in at any one stage, that the 2nd degree is normally a sharpened note. So if that note has been flattened, that sharp will have been naturalised. So it could be that we're looking for a natural sign as well. So when I say the note has been flattened, it means we're looking for an added accidental, and you know what note it ends up being is totally dependent on the context of what key you're in. So bear that in mind. Now, straight away from bar 27, I'm seeing extra accidentals. Okay, I'm seeing G naturals. So it's possible that something has come from a G sharp and been flattened to a G natural. And I'm also seeing a B flat here. So these aren't notes that I'm necessarily expecting, so I definitely need to determine the key that I am in. Okay, I'm going to go back to just before bar 27, because bar 27 seems, well, the final beat of bar 26, which is here. It seems as if that's the start of a new little section. And if I look beforehand, it looks as though we've had a cadence, because we've got rests up here, you know, and then something new starting in the violin ones. We've got rests down in the viola and cello part here. So it looks as if we've sort of ended a phrase previously. So I'm going to look at the end of that phrase and the cadence to determine what key I'm in at this section. The notes in the bottom, in the bass, cello, are A's. And we know we're in D major. We've just talked about the fact that we had modulated to the subdominant G. As soon as I see A's, unless it's an imperfect cadence in D major, I'm going to be considering whether it's modulated to A major in this passage here. Oh, in this passage here. That's good, isn't it? So looking back, the added accidental I've got is a G sharp. There's lots of G sharp, so I've got my key signature of F sharp and C sharp, but I've added a G sharp, and we've just been thinking about this. We've just been talking and thinking about our cycle of fifths. If we are in D major and we're adding a G sharp, it means that we've moved one step around clockwise. We've added a sharp, which means we've gone to the dominant key of A major, and that would be supported by the fact that we've now got A's as well in the bass. And let's look previously to that. We've got G's, we've got E's. So yes, we've gone 5-1 in A major. So this section, starting from bar 27, the upbeat to bar 27, is in A major. Now in A major, the second degree of the scale is a B, and so when it's flattened, it's a B flat. And lo and behold, in bar 28, I've got a B flat. I almost don't need to look at anything else. I don't need to look at the other notes in the chord. If I carry on, I only noticed this because of my highlighting disaster. I've also got some B flats down here. So this is bar 30, 31, and then that's being imitated by the oboes. We've got some nice B flats. Are we still in A in that section? We need to examine whether we've got G sharps or not. We've got a G sharp there. However, it becomes a bit ambiguous because we've got a G that isn't sharpened here. So around this point, I'm going to do a wiggle. Around this section, gosh, I'm so professional today, we're probably transitioning away from A major. So stating that a chord with a B flat in it is a Neapolitan chord is not necessarily guaranteed, because if we're no longer in A major and we're moving out of that key, then the B being flattened, the B wouldn't be the second degree of the scale. It's not going to be the supertonic. However, if we go back to bar 28, so here we've got an A in the bass. I think it's fair to assume that the general key from this point onwards, let's look at the next bar. Yes, it's an A, and we've got G sharps in the next bar, and then an A. I think it's fair to assume that we are in A major, and we've got a B flat. So I would pick bar 28, beat 3, this one here. Now you might be thinking in the previous bar we've got some G naturals. We've also got a D sharp down here, which is a little bit unpleasant. But we've got to pick one bar, and I would say, whilst this is obviously quite harmonically complex, this chord, 28, beat 3, is our best bet for a Neapolitan chord. And the other notes in this chord, I mean, it's quite sparse scoring. The violin twos are playing an F, and the violas, we're going to need to look at the viola part in order to work it out. They're playing a D, so it is a B flat D F chord, and that is definitely the Neapolitan chord in A major. So that would be my choice. Don't need to look at this page because I'm happy with that one. Okay, so the next question, a first inversion 5/7 chord. So if you want to go and have a look for that yourself and you know what you're looking for, then off you go, pause the video. If you want to talk through strategy, keep listening. So for a first inversion 5/7 chord, it does depend on the key, and we already know that we've got some A major section at the start. We know that we've got D major, we know that we've got G major at some point. I can't remember what order they are. We're going to need to go back and ascertain that. So it's wholly dependent on the key, but what we do know is it's a chord with 4 notes. It's in first inversion, so we're going to, we'll double check that, but it's a chord with 4 notes. Now that's a lot to look for. Key places where chord 5s are going to be is penultimate chords prior to cadence points, so prior to the end of phrases. So to help speed us up if we start to struggle, that's something we can kind of filter down. But this question is quite a general one, and I think it's quite challenging. I would suggest maybe, I mean, there are going to be presumably quite a lot of 5/7 chords, and I'm sure some of them are in first inversion. I suggest it's better to maybe pick a point where you know exactly what the key is. So that section we just looked at, where it was transitioning from A major back into D, I wouldn't look at anywhere that's harmonically unclear or transitory. I would look at a place where it's very clear what key you're in and start looking for chord 5s that have got the 7. Let's have a look together. If you want to give it a go, you can, or you can stay listening. Okay, so remembering I'm looking from bar 27, but as I've just said, this whole area is slightly ambiguous. I'm not happy about it. I mean, we're in A, but then we've got G naturals, and we've got some more, etc., etc. And I think we'd established for bar 35 that this was A1, that this is the return of the A section in rounded binary form in the minuet, and we are back in the tonic key of the movement, which is D major, and we've got D's in the bass. Okay, so for now I'm quite happy in this section. I feel like the harmony is stable. I know that chord 5 in this section is going to be an A, C sharp, E, and then with the 7 it's going to have a G. And I know that in first inversion I'm looking for the 7. Sorry, in the first inversion I'm looking for the second note of the chord, C sharp, to be in the bass. So for now, until I think I've modulated, I'm going to scan for C sharps. And so to do that, I'm looking at, remember you've got to cover both octaves, so I'm either looking for a ledger line that is on the line just above the bass clef stave, or I'm looking for a note that is in the second space up from the bottom. And I'm going to scan. So I'm moving along the bass line. Stop. I've got a D followed by a C sharp, so actually, sorry, I stopped slightly early. So I've now come across a C sharp. I'm going to look above that to see what other notes I can see. So I'm looking for A's and E's and G's. And I can't see them. I've got F sharps, that's C doubled, F sharp. God knows what the viola's playing, can't be bothered. Right, moving on, next page. Okay, so on the next page I need to be careful because I know that it's modulated here because I've had to look for the key in this bar 43, and we established we'd gone into G. So I'm now thinking, well, I'm not sure exactly where that modulation has happened because it just depends whether we've got C naturals earlier than that. I'm going to stick quite close to bar 43. So I'm scanning along. I think I'm probably still in D at the start here, underneath, but then I need to start being wary from bar 43 onwards. Now, if I'm now in G, my chord 5 is going to be D, F sharp, A, C. So in first inversion, that's going to put an F sharp in the bass. Oh, wait, lo and behold, we've had a whole conversation about this one. You see, very often, if you are quite detailed and thorough with your analysis when you're answering one of the questions, it will really help you to answer another question. Because there's an F sharp, and we were talking about the fact that the key in this bar was G major, but it was a chord 5 in first inversion. So there's my chord 5 in first inversion, and I forgot about it. I also forgot about the fact that we said that there were 4 notes in the chord, because we've got this, the C natural, which is our 7th. So we found it. It's a chord we've already analysed. Now, I don't know whether Educast would do that, where they're repeating, you know, the answer. You've had to look at the key for bar 43, and you've then also had to look for a chord that's in bar 43, but they might well do. They're not trying to, you know, trick you as such. They're trying to offer a level of challenge, but they're wanting you to show that you can be analytical. So the fact that you can tell that because of the C naturals, we've moved into G major, we've modulated the subdominant, you know, that's a separate bit of understanding to the fact that in this bar, whilst we're in G, the actual chord is a chord 5/7 in first inversion. So it's still testing you on that ability, on that skill. So we've got our answer. It's bar 43. Hooray! And then I'm going to scan quickly just to be extra cautious. I think it goes back to D at the end because we're going D, A, D, A, D, A, D. So it's pretty obvious it's going to have gone back into D major for the end of the minuet, and that would make sense. So in D major, chord 5, A, C sharp, E, G. Have I got any C sharps in the bass? No. So I'm pretty happy that that's the only one, bar 43. I'm happy with that. Chord 5/7 in first inversion in the key of G major. Okay, so finally, a tonic pedal. Now, I think these are quite easy. If a tonic pedal or a dominant pedal comes up on the exam, then I think you should be quite pleased because it's relatively easy to see at a glance. You don't need to do too much digging, but obviously the tonic pedal, so whatever note is the tonic, is going to vary depending on the key, and we know that this is a section where there are modulations, so that does add a little bit more challenge. If you want to go and give this a go, then you can pause the video. If you want me to talk through it in a bit more detail and show you how I found it, then stay with me. Okay, so this is what I've written. Easy, sustained or repeated note. Now, the one point to make is that it obviously could jump octaves. So a tonic pedal, it could be sustained, as in a long held note with a long duration. It could be a repeated note, so for example, a repeated crotchet, repeated quavers on the same note. But you could jump octaves, and so sometimes, especially if you're not that familiar with score reading, because you're not seeing the blob stay in the same place on the stave, and there's movement, you can miss it. So let's have a look. It might not be that difficult. Okay, so remembering that I'm going from bar 27, I'm going to look at my bass line. Now this is interesting because I've got A, then I've got A, then I've got A, then I've got A. And we've looked at this bit a lot, and how about the fact that it was in A major, it had gone to the dominant, but then afterwards, and we haven't got anything in the cello part here, and it's all a bit ambiguous and transitory. But we had talked about the fact that we were in A. So this is the tonic note, this A, that's being repeated, but I wouldn't say it's really a pedal. You know, you've got a minim in bar 27, and then a rest, and then you've got crotchets on the first beat of the bar. So I'm not that happy with that. I'm going to carry on. So the next section, from bar 35, we'd already established that we're in D major at 35 because this is the return of A1. We have got repeated Ds And look, those Ds are jumping octaves. Now, I think you could argue that that is a pedal because we've got chords changing over the top of repeated Ds. So technically a pedal is when that tonic note is sustained underneath changing chords or repeated underneath changing chords. However, it's not the clearest pedal because rhythmically it is so varied. I'm going to keep looking for now. So the next section, we've got different notes. We've not got repeated notes at all, so I can ignore that section. Up here, I've got repeated notes. I've got A's. I think we'd established that we've moved back to the tonic here, so that's a repeated dominant note, and then I've just talked about the fact that we're going 1 5 1 5 1 5 1. Okay, so on that basis, I would go back to the previous page and I would take bars 35, 36, 37 as my tonic pedal, even though rhythmically the notes aren't the same. Harmonically, it is a tonic pedal. So that's an interesting one. So they've not made it too easy. It's not the most obvious, but that's the best fit for that question. Okay, so here are our answers. So as we said, it's A1, or A with the little one that's a subscript. We said at bar 43 we'd gone to G major because we had the C natural, so we'd moved anti-clockwise on the circle of fifths. We'd gone to the subdominant key. We found our Neapolitan chord with the B flats at bar 28, beat 3. Our first inversion 5/7 chord was also bar 43, where we identified the G major key. And the tonic pedal, so the answer that they have given is that you could use the 27 to 30 with the repeated A's. I'm not massively happy about that one, and I think that Educast wouldn't give you that as an example. I think I'm not too sure it's just that it's reliable enough just because it's before a passage of transition. However, they have got the section from 35 with the D's as the answer to that one. So not a typical tonic pedal, which makes it more challenging, but the harmony is shifting over the top of the tonic note that is repeated in different ways. So that is the end of question 15.